Today I'm making the BD1 droid from Jedi Fallen Order. For this build, I use these shop tools, these materials, these machines, and these safety gears. That's not the gear... Learn how to grammar. I started with a sheet of foam. It's one of my favorite materials to work with. I'm building out EVA foam because it's cheap, it's malleable, it comes in multiple colors, so sometimes you don't even need to paint it. And at this point, I've done it so much that it's pretty much second nature to me. I can do this with my eyes closed. I don't even need to pay attention to what I'm doing, and before you know it, I built a complete droid. Oh. That wasn't what I was trying to... I can't do anything right.
You can't beat yourself up over these things. You just gotta look at this as a learning experience and use it to become a better maker.
Wait a minute, I can use you for parts!
Wait, what?
Perfect!
Roger!
No! I'm using EVA foam, which is the same material in both craft foam and yoga mats, or exercise mats. Although I've made most of my living as a carpenter, this is usually my material of choice, because I don't have to paint it if I put just a little bit of pre-planning into the build and go, okay, I need this much of these three colors. Otherwise, painting would add another week to these builds, and I don't have the budget for that. Support me on Patreon. So I'm just gonna use the foam that corresponds to the color of the parts of the robot. And don't get me wrong, they make Plastidip sealant in white, gray, red, and black. So by all means, if you want an amazing paint job and have weeks to do this, then go for it. But I'm working against the clock, and I'm totally eyeballing this. When I started, I was like, okay, this is one of my props that's actually going to come out to scale. Because half the time, I'm building from video game characters, and they're like not the size of real people. They're all 6'4" and spend every second of downtime at LA Fitness. So you build to that scale, and the prop ends up looking 1.5 times bigger. And I was thrilled about not making the same mistake, but then HD footage came out, and it clearly depicts this thing as no taller than a foot. So if you're trying to follow my tutorial, even the smallest increment below the measurements that I'm using is going to be more accurate. The best piece of advice I can give, I suppose, is get a work knife or box cutter and a knife sharpener. This one is 100 years old. Modern ones look like a screwdriver with no head. And just constantly sharpen it, like after every cut. Basically, the sharper your knife, the smoother your cut, and the less sanding you have to do. And I cannot tell you how much of my life has been spent sanding. I'm using red and black craft foam for the details, which you can find at any Michael's or Pat Catan's if you're in the Midwest, sometimes local hobby shops. I'm also using gray floor mats because there is some, sci-fi gray in here. Those you can get at most hardware stores. All the angles that I cut off earlier, I've saved and I've re-glued into the 90-degree angles to create that slanted edge. Oh, also better glue is contact cement, but it has a longer working time and is toxic. And again, on a super time crunch, prop maker problems! Woo! For the leg holes, I'm using this nearly spent roll of tape as a guide, the exterior that is, and cut out the circles. I put thin craft foam in there to form a rim, or I don't know, what'd you call that, a fender? Tiny fender. Now that the basic body is done, I'm going to move on to the neck. The neck, I'm making out a 1/4 inch craft foam. I'm using hole saw offcuts wherever I can because they're stronger than foam, and honestly, what else am I going to use them for? So I glued that in and closed it up. I created a hinge by stabbing this sharpened dowel rod in there. It's a skewer, but I mean, if you cut a bunch of sections of dowel rods, they'll fit in a pencil sharpener, so you sharpen them that way. I felt like the neck was just a little bit too long, so I cut off 1 inch. My interpretation of this part is it's kind of like a square piston, so for the extender part, I'm using stacked segments of puzzle piece strips that come with the 2x2 foam sheets, when you open a new package. Then I made the little platform that the head will eventually sit on top of. I wasn't sure how to make the head, so I started with the legs. I put a PVC T-joint inside the body for the legs to attach to. Oh, but ignore what I'm doing there with the thin bit of foam and the narrow pipe. I was hoping to sort of make a tension fit, but it didn't really work out, so I moved on to building the legs and figured I'd tackle that problem later while I've had time to mull it over in my mind brain. This is my favorite part of the build because the robot legs just scream Star Wars. They're like little mini R2-D2 legs. Okay, this is another filming error. So when the hacked up angles on the sides of things or the patterns on the back of the foam suddenly become smooth like that, It's because I've run them on the belt sander in the next room. That's an inconvenient place to film. But at this point, I literally got days of stock footage of me sanding. So here's a belt sander montage. Oh boy, here's me sanding a helmet. And here's me sanding infinity gems. And here's me sanding wood. Duh, and here's me sanding my fingerprints off after the robbery at the hobby shop. What? Wasn't that informative? But like I said, the sharper your knife, the less you have to sand. Oh, also, you can use our rotary tool to sand if that's more in your price range. Which is actually necessary if you want to sand the interior spaces like I'm doing here. I've gotten into the habit of tracing each part as I make it so that I can duplicate it in the future if I need to, which I usually need to. I'm using a silver paint pen for that because a little bit of ink will inevitably end up on the droid part, and on a corner edge like this, I want that to look like weathering, and it makes more sense that it would bump up against something and then that would knock a little bit of paint off to reveal metal underneath, as opposed to black, which would represent dirt accumulation in a crevasse, which would be like an opposite negative version of the edge of a robot. Did that make any sense? I don't know. I'm not a wordsmith. After I got my main template, I used its general dimensions to figure out the forearm piece, which was just a nightmare because as of recording this, not a ton of reference material is out on this thing, and in the photos it looks like one solid leg, but when it moves in the gameplay footage, it looks like it turns to rubber for a second. Like it folds sideways at the elbow. Almost like they've moved the wrist down to the elbow and extended the hand to the length of a forearm. It's a horrific thing to picture. And I don't know if that's because I'm watching a low resolution promo clip or the animators are just doing their best with limited options. But I'm just gonna assume that there's a joint there. In between trying to make sense of low resolution footage, I filled in the details on the upper arm. I cut out and glued together those arm parts. I'm using the thicker floor mats for this so that I don't have to do as many layers. It's hard to find specific colors in stores, but you can find whatever you want on Amazon, so don't burn a ton of gas driving around for that. In fact, I just bought a whole bunch of yellow for my DRD army. That's just for me. I don't think anyone's gonna get that. When the glue dried, I cut the part below the elbow and added a rounded edge so that that forearm bit could swivel. I used more sharpened dowels to make that hinge. I joined the two arm parts with the foam circle offcuts and dowel segments. Yeah, look at that. I made the red details out of red foam. The red comes out pink on camera and I don't want to have to correct it a bunch in post, so I colored it with red markers. Am I doing brand names and no brand names? I mean, it doesn't help that I have this CSX ruler in every video ever. Making some bits of ruler. So just to give you an idea of what my process is, I did not know exactly how this was going to work. So as I found pieces that would work, I made duplicates. So let's do that one now. Okay, so here's where I thought I was done, but can anyone tell me the mistake that I made? Anybody? I can't believe I did that. To fix that problem, I have to switch around one of the forearms, which isn't so difficult, and then move the details to the other side, which is so difficult. But it's not a total loss. I don't have to rebuild the whole forearm. I was able to remove them by melting the hot glue with the heat gun. This destroyed the details, but saved the forearm. Ugh, look at that. Delicious. And there we go, 2 mirror image legs. The feet weren't quite as difficult because they're both identical. There's a really good high resolution close-up shot of the droid running, like the highest shutter speed possible. So I didn't have to really waste any time extrapolating the shapes. I just cut it up. I put magnets in the feet to help him grip metal surfaces though. Even though I'm building out of extremely lightweight foam, like this would float if you threw it in water, the weight of the whole thing together will far exceed the gripping force of the magnets. This is really just to hold the feet in place while I puppeteer the thing. I attached those to the ankles with, you guessed it, dowel rods. I don't know why I was so happy about that. And then sanded off the sharp end. Also, that's like a cartoon, non-human level of happiness. Tone it down. Take it down a notch. Oh boy. Now that the legs were finished, I had to re-tackle the problem of attaching them to the body. However, I recalled that I had this same issue when I built the battle droid, so I reverse engineered that. So difficult. This is really simple, guys. To come up with this spool dowel foam solution. Those shoulders are pivot points, and I'm gonna have a band of foam threaded inside the PVC joint, connecting them. I lengthened the arms of the PVC joint with segments of PVC cut out with the PVC cutter. Go figure. I got a cure for that. So here's where we make the obligatory joke about putting my sweat and blood into this. Although I probably should bandage that because unlike other props I've made, I'm not painting this and it's white. So yeah, it's definitely gonna show. Hey Jake, what kind of paint did you use to get that awesome rust Ferris weathering? Human? Really? You sure? Oh, positive. Who are you, Dr. Carl Landsteiner? I just wanted to point out that this is the only injury sustained on this entire project. 3 days messing around with razor blades and razor pens and box cutters, and the only thing that I cut myself on was my PVC cut. Not even the blade of the PVC cutter. Like just a metal support arm. Not even really a cut, it just pushed the skin off. So at this point, it's late at night, I have to stop working on it, so I figured this is a good time to apply contact cement. That way, it will air out overnight, and the seam with the most stress on it has the strongest glue point. The next morning, when that was aired out, I began to work on the head. I used 1/4-inch craft foam for this because it's more malleable and, most importantly, lighter. First, I cut the faceplate behind the goggles, then I cut slightly smaller rectangles with rounded edges for the interior supports. I constructed a skeleton out of craft foam and used a full sheet of 1/4-inch foam to cover it, heat forming the areas that would need to wrap over the sides. As I'm doing this, I'm trying to both keep area for the components that will need to go in there later, and also not close off those areas before placing the component. This part that I'm working on now is, well, I think it's supposed to be like a computer's vent fan because it looks like my computer's vent fan. But it also kind of looks like a light bright. To get some of the shapes on top, I added another layer of even thinner craft foam and cut out the area after it was attached for some reason. The ears were also assembled out of foam. I assembled the ears one at a time, but I may change that later because in some new footage just came out while I was building this, it looks like both the ears are moving in unison, which would indicate one solid axle, so I'll probably connect them later. I made and attached these black heat sinks, more colored foam. Why didn't I use, oh right, because I don't have black 1/2-inch sheets, that's why. Then I built up the Wally goggles. I couldn't find the eyeball pieces, so I switched back to the computer fan light bright area. There's a lot of jumping around in these builds. They don't always happen in a way that's convenient to edit in a step-by-step tutorial. I cut holes running the length of the head so that some of the light from the back will make it up to the eye in the front because it looks like there's a little blue glow coming in there. Then I added lights, and then I added a cover. I couldn't find my hole punch, but I could find my steel hole punch. It's just absolutely ridiculous. I gotta reorganize my shop. And began punching those holes by hand. So the lights look semi-uniform in nature, which gives me a lot of leeway in terms of my precision or lack thereof. But for all I know, when we get high-res images, they'll be perfectly machined lattice work, in which case I'll have to replace it with material from my computer housing. So the part I wanted to use for the eye was one of those air vents above your seat on airplanes, but I thought that would probably not end well for me if I got on a plane and tried to take it apart with a Leatherman. Like I'd be able to get on a plane with a Leatherman. Flying is the worst for me, guys. The absolute worst. I drove to Atlanta last Dragon Con. So instead I'm building the eye out of a swivel socket night light, a plumbing part, and some kind of bottle cap. The antennae, is that the plural of antenna? Were made from antenna from dead radios, as well as this silver Sharpie that I cut up. Then I attached the eye that I previously assembled, because by now the super glue is dry, and made the other one out of foam and plastic and Sharpies. Now that the head is basically complete, I cut a notch in it for the neck and actually contact cemented that. Because again, by this time I had to go to sleep, so figured let it sit overnight, air out. See, this would have been a one-day build, but it ended up being 3 days because I kept having to stop to run errands or eat. Why can't I just be a cyborg? Well, I guess some cyborgs have to eat, right? Oh, and that doesn't even include the time that it takes to edit this. So as far as I can tell, there's one other BD1 model in existence as of filming this, and it's absolutely beautiful, but it looks like it's a statue with the only motion ability in its head. Because while its head is moving around, the rest of it is totally motionless aside from a slight shimmy. I'm not knocking it. I'm pretty sure that that's the only way to do it with our current technology, but I want mine to be more of a puppet with a complete range of motion so that it can be animated off frame with control rods that I can later remove and post. That way I can create the illusion of a full robot for film and video. Who am I kidding? Just video. Now what differentiates Star Wars production design from other franchises is the GAC, or the Greeblies, which is, like, GAC is the plural of Greeblies. A flock of Greeblies is called a GAC, and you'll notice that my droid is seriously lacking in Greeblies. And that's partly because the droid is customizable in the game, so it's not always going to have the same Greeblies. And I haven't played the game yet, so I'm not sure what Greeblies makes sense. But it's also because doing all of that detail will double the production time and budget, and I'm already way over budget. Support me on Patreon, link below. So I'll just have to do the Greeblies in a future video, and in the meantime, he's a factory new BD1. And that's how you make a BD1 droid. Like and subscribe if you want.
This is for Roger.
You're Jedi. I thought Jedis fight battle droids.
Enemies can become friends.
Traitor!
Ugh.
Oh. I mean, that's probably enough. Yeah, that one was on me. That was it.
Ledge here.
Yeah, well, it's a theme. It's a motif for Star Wars because there's always a precipice that someone.
I have the high ground.
Yeah, you have the high ground. Oh no! Can he not go with the weight of the beer? It's not gonna help. Well, hold on, I didn't say I didn't want it. Good boy.